Today we will be continuing our study through the book of Daniel. We will be covering Daniel chapter 2. If you remember, last time we were together, we had covered Daniel chapter 1. Daniel and his three friends are in Babylon. They are captive, but they are going through essentially brainwash training, learning about the Babylonians and their school and their religion and their politics and their language and all that kind of stuff. Well, Daniel chapter 2 builds on that, and we're going to see it ends up culminating in Nebuchadnezzar's dream of this great image or great statue. So that Daniel 2 to 7 begins the Aramaic section of the book. If you remember in the introduction, we said chapters 1 and then 8 to 12 are in Hebrew, and chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are and 7 are in Aramaic, the trade language of the day, because 1, 8 to 12 are mainly about the future of Israel. 2 to 7 focuses a lot on Gentile rulers and the future Gentile kingdoms, and so it's almost like Daniel's like, they should be able to hear that, but they don't need to hear about what's happening in our future, kind of idea. So you have kind of a chiastic, what we call a chiastic structure in the section. A chiasm is basically when things correlate. So chapter 2, you have a dream of a metallic statue. Chapter 7, you have a vision of coming beasts, and they're very similar. They share a lot of similar ideas. Chapter 3, you have the fiery furnace. Chapter 6, you have the lion's den. So you have kind of trial by ordeal. And then chapters 4 and 5, you have Nebuchadnezzar's failure and his eventual, he kind of goes crazy for a while. And then chapter 5, you have Belshazzar's failure, where Babylon is captured, he's killed, and all that. We'll get to those in a few weeks. The structure of Daniel 2, you have the receiving of the dream. Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, goes to his wise men, he has the dream. The recovery of the dream, the revelation of the dream, and the interpretation of the dream. So essentially what happens is Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and for us, we think, oh, dreams, they're just some kind of psychotic release when we are asleep, and if you had a bad day, sometimes you have nightmares, or if you're stressed out, you have nightmares and this kind of stuff. But in the ancient world, they viewed dreams as messages from the gods, essentially. And so they would have these dream books. Think of it like some type of psychic today or something like that, where they would say, okay, you had a dream about a bear. That must mean a bear means that you're under attack. You had a dream about a dove. That must mean you're going to have peace in your kingdom. They had these books, and whatever was in your dream, they would then say, oh, this means this means this, this means this. And so when Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, the diviners are going to think, oh, we can do this and interpret this dream. The problem becomes, as we'll see, Nebuchadnezzar won't tell them his dream, so they can't then use their books and do this. Daniel doesn't have to do that because God directly intervenes. So as we see here, they recover the dream. Let me flip over to Daniel chapter 2. I would encourage you to follow along in your Bible. Daniel chapter 2, it says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. So he has nightmares, basically. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, living forever, tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. So he comes to them, he says, I had a nightmare, I want you to interpret this nightmare. And they say, okay, tell us the nightmare and we'll interpret it. We'll pull out the little dream books and we'll interpret it. But Nebuchadnezzar's smart. As the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. So he's not stupid. He's saying, if I tell you the dream, you're just going to make up something and some kind of interpretation from these books and all this stuff. If you're really as powerful and as wise and all this as you claim to be, that you've been telling me for all these years that you have all these mystical arts and these kinds of things, then I shouldn't have to tell you the dream. You should already know the dream. You should be able to interpret the dream. That's what I've been paying you for. They've been eating at the king's table. They get a salary and all this kind of stuff. He's saying, I'm paying you to do this. I shouldn't need to tell you the dream. And if you can't do this, I'm going to kill you because you've been lying to me and telling me you could do this whole time. They answered a second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. The king answered them, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. So once again, he's saying, you're just trying to stall by time. You've been lying to me this whole time if you can't really do what you said you can do. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. So essentially they tell the king, no human can do this. In the ancient Near Eastern mindset, the gods did not regularly come down and just talk to you and explain things. They would do it through these mystical things, through these kind of dream books, through omens, through they would cut animals open and read their entrails and try to get these things, but they didn't have direct communication with the gods, with their gods. They said, nobody can do this. The gods don't talk to us. Our gods can't communicate with us. They don't do these kinds of things. Which is interesting, because that's exactly what Isaiah, in Isaiah 40 to 48, is going to say hundreds of years, about 150 years in advance, 140 years before this, about 100 years before this, that the pagan gods can't tell the future, can't intervene on behalf of their people, and are just created beings. And so you kind of get this bill. They're admitting a lot of this. Because of this, the king was angry and furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So he's like, all right, why am I paying you guys? If you guys can't do this, you've been lying to me, I'm just going to wipe you all out. Now this is to an extreme. He's asking them basically for something that's pretty much impossible from a human perspective, and then getting mad when they can't do it and going to wipe out all of his advisors and wise men and whatnot. But he is upset. It's clear that the dream kind of horrified him. He wants to know what it is, and because he can't do it, he's just upset. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Why? Because they are part of this group. They are kind of at the bottom of the totem pole, though, so they weren't called in immediately. They're either still in their training program or just out of their training program, but they're considered wise men in this thing. But so it's basically like they come, they knock on the door, and they're like, hey, we're here to kill you. And Daniel and his friends are like, well, why? And they're like, because your bosses can't do anything. They've been lying to the king all this time. They can't really do all the stuff that they claim to do. So Daniel then goes, Well, wait a second. Let me go and pray. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, pray for me. Help fast pray. Let me pray and see if God will do something. And so he buys some time. He prays. And eventually he goes to the king and says this, beginning in verse 24. Daniel went to Arioch. He's the guy that was going around trying to kill everyone. The king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He said to him, "Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation." Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said to him, "I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation." The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation?" And Daniel answered the king, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or astrologer can show the king the mystery that the king has asked." So he says, "No, I can't do this myself. Nobody can do this. The wise men were right. No human can do this. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed came thoughts of what would be after this, and he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind." So Daniel's incredibly humble in this. He could have just walked up to the king and said, "Yeah, I know your dream. I got this power. Make me awesome. Give me a bunch of gifts." But he doesn't. He says, "God gave me the dream. It's nothing that I can do. I don't have any divine power or anything like that. This is all God. He's working through me." And then he's going to tell Nebuchadnezzar this dream. So it lines up with the beast in chapter 7 as well, but this is essentially what it is, what the dream is. He says, "First you saw a head of gold." That's you, Nebuchadnezzar. You're the head of gold. After that, you see arms of silver. That's going to be the next kingdom. It's a line of kingdoms. The statue works its way down through all the next 4 Gentile kingdoms, ultimately culminating into the kingdom of the Antichrist in the end times. So he says the next kingdom is going to have bronze and silver. We know this is the Media-Persian Empire that's going to conquer Babylon in Daniel chapter 5. Then he says there's a belly of brass, or bronze, however it's translated in your Bible. And this is the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. And some more details about how we understand this will become available in chapter 7 when we go through that. But for now, these are the kingdoms that are in line. Then he says you have feet of iron, legs of iron. That's the Roman Empire that would come. And then you have feet of iron and clay. Iron and clay don't mix. And so the whole statue is unstable. Then he talks about here this stone cut out without human hands. This divine stone is going to come, and it's going to crush the toes of the statue, and the whole statue is going to fall down. And he says, and so the stone represents the kingdom of God, that God's kingdom will eventually destroy human government. And it says the stone gets larger and fills the whole earth. This would be Christ's kingdom. This is the second coming, basically. When Christ comes, destroys the kingdom of the Antichrist, throws the Antichrist in the lake of fire, the false prophet in the lake of fire. They seal Satan away in the abyss, and Christ rules on earth for 1,000 years in the millennial kingdom. And we'll be there as Christians. We will be there with him in glorified bodies. And so Daniel says this is talking about some of the end, talking about times in the end times. And so this is a amazing prediction that he's going to have laying out all these different kingdoms. And we'll see in chapter 7, he adds some more details to some of this as well. But he says this, and this is what's very fascinating in the story. He says, and in the days of, in verse 44, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. So there's going to be this future kingdom. It's never going to be destroyed, and it's going to last forever. It would be the millennial kingdom into the eternal state, essentially. And it shall stand forever. It shall break it to pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Well, what happens at the second coming? You have all these nations that are coming under the power of the Antichrist to destroy the Jewish people, to fight Christ. Christ comes, wipes them out immediately, and then he's in charge after that point. He's on the throne. He's reigning from the throne of David in Jerusalem. The book of Isaiah and other passages tell us that. And while there's still nations to some extent, because he talks about Assyria and Egypt and all these different people groups and nations and tribes, or however you want to describe that, there's still some kind of ethnicity to some of these. They're not in charge. Christ is in charge. They don't have kings and rulers and these kinds of things from a human perspective. God is in charge. Jesus is in charge during this whole time. And ultimately, human government will come to an end at the time of the second coming. And so this is what he's describing. You'll notice from the top down, the materials are greater in value on the top and become less valuable as you go down, but they become stronger as you go down. And so gold is very valuable, but it's not very strong. Iron is not as valuable, but it's much, much stronger than gold. And so the idea is that these empires will become stronger and stronger as time goes on. Babylon controls a lot of territory, but they can never really conquer Persia. They don't really go into Turkey all that much, and Egypt and that kind of thing. The Persians take over. They control Persia and all of Babylon. The Greeks come in and under Alexander the Great conquer. They control Greece, all in parts of Europe and all of Persia, all the way up to India, basically. And then the Romans come in and control all the way. At one point, the Romans controlled all the way from Great Britain. They control the Iron of Britannia, is what they call it, all the way down basically to India. They control so much territory. So the nations just continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually the kingdom of the Antichrist is going to control the whole known world basically. And so they get stronger, but one day Christ will come, destroy human government, and take over and rule and reign forever. So the theological implications of this chapter: God is able to get the attention of the leaders of the world. Think about it. Nebuchadnezzar is the most powerful man on the planet at this time, pretty much, at least in the Middle East and the ancient Near East, the main area where we're focused at. And yet God is able to get his attention, even though he's a pagan, through these dreams. And he's also going to provide somebody who's already there, Daniel, to be able to interpret these dreams as well. God is able to use godly people to communicate its truth to the leaders of the world. And you see this throughout the Bible, especially throughout the Old Testament. A lot of the most powerful people in the world had interaction with Jews or godly people. We see that Joseph is able to meet with the Pharaoh of Egypt, one of the most powerful people in the world at his time. Moses is able to meet with the Pharaoh of Egypt. Daniel is able to meet with Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah was able to meet with Nebuchadnezzar. Esther is going to be able to meet with Xerxes. Nehemiah is going to be able to meet with Artaxerxes. So you have these constant flow of these powerful people that God always has kind of had this idea that God puts people in specific spots so that they can communicate with the leaders of the world. And then God's kingdom will be victorious over all the kingdoms of the world. One day when Christ is in charge, when Christ comes back, you're not going to have to worry, oh, will Russia be able to defeat him, or China, or the United States, or any. No, when Christ comes back, he's in charge. You don't have to worry about that. His kingdom will be the kingdom. Then one footnote, kind of at the end of the passage, it says, the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face, beginning of verse 46, and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, truly your God is God of gods, and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. So what you're going to see through this is Nebuchadnezzar kind of has a choppy but gradual progression to Yahweh. In this chapter, he's like, your God is really good at revealing mysteries. But he doesn't say he's the only God or that he's my God or anything like that. We're going to see in chapter 3, he's going to say something similar. And then finally in chapter 4, he's finally going to have what most people agree is some kind of conversion experience to begin to worship Yahweh as the true God. So it takes him a while, and he has to go through a lot, as we'll see in chapter 4, to reach that conclusion. Then it says, then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. That's important because when the wise men, the Magi, come in Matthew chapter 2, people always ask, how did they know about the Messiah? How did they know that this king of the Jews was going to show up? I think it's because that for hundreds of years, Daniel had laid the foundation that they were looking through the Old Testament, and they had access to a lot of these predictions and whatnot to know about these things. Then it says, Daniel made a request to the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. So that's why when we get to chapter 3 next time, Daniel is not there with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're out in the province of Babylon, whereas he's in the city of Babylon. So they're kind of out in the countryside, and he's back in the city. So it's not like he's worshiping the statue. He's not even there. He's back in the city, running things in the city. They're out in the countryside, in the rural areas, wherever that would be. So that wraps up chapter 2. Next time we'll get into chapter 3 with the whole fiery furnace issue.